the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
To our little 30-second opener on OBS so that all the other places this is going out to can also hear us.
And there we go. All right, so we are doing this a different way again this week. For everybody, so hello and welcome to We Lost Mike. Damn it, that's not the show name. Sorry. Hello and welcome to.
And there we go. All right, so we are doing this a different way again this week for everybody. So hello and welcome to We Lost Mike.
There we go. The HBR Talk 298.
That's not the show name. Sorry. Hello and welcome to the HBR Talk. Where did my page go? There we go. The HBR Talk 298 stream. And for those who are listening on Twitter, to the HBR Talk 298 space. Child support, political scam. And we're going to be talking about some things we talked about last week in from a little different angle, a little more depth. We're going to consider the question: what if everything you know about child support is a lie? But before we get into all that, first we got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions and experiences, both recent and long past, that demonstrated that provoked thought are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justatip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So, 2 weeks ago, we started talking about the issue of child support in the United States in response to existing discussion about Vivek Ramaswamy's comments on the subject. And last week on HBR Talk, on our live stream, you're getting double here. How?
I have to take a look at some things in OBS and figure out what's going on there.
Hannah, can you send the invite to Mike again?
Yeah, I don't know how you're getting double
I'll bet one of them is really quiet.
either. All right, I might have to take a look at some things in OBS and figure out what's going on there. Hopefully, I know what to do. I'll bet one of them is really quiet. That probably will get rid of the doubles. Yep. Try that. All right. See if Mike is back. Hey, Mike is back. All right. You just have to unmute.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Audible. We can
Okay,
actually
good.
hear you now. Good.
All right. Sorry, carry on.
It's okay. So we were looking at some history last week involving the very organic feminist academic revolution and its totally legitimate institutional, corporate, and government sponsors. So to briefly, for anybody that wasn't listening to the live stream last week, to give you a heads up on that, if you go back to our Badger live stream, you can see the whole stream. But we talked about an old article that made a bunch of predictions and discussed a bunch of things going on at the time. This is from like 1992 in regard to the spread of women's studies as an academic area of study, starting with just women's studies classes and moving on from classes to an entire area of study, an entire major, and then its permeation of other areas of academic study. And we were looking at things like how much funding it got, where that funding came from, how involved the government was in making this happen, and so on. And it makes it pretty obvious. And we'll continue going over that next week on HBR Talk on the live stream. But it made it pretty obvious that this was not just something that happened. You know, feminism isn't just an underdog movement that became more and more popular because of how bad things were for women. There was actually a whole series of steps that took place that were, in cahoots with the government, in cahoots with establishment, charitable organizations that basically exist to promote things the establishment wants to happen all along. And when we've talked about in the past the long march through the institution, this has been a manifestation of that the whole time. Feminism has been a manifestation of that the whole time. So with that in mind, we're going to get into the issues in the child support enforcement system. I'm actually going to add another link because I wrote about this I have been trying to get this to open, and I think it's it's not a problem with the article, it's a problem with my dinosaur of a desktop computer, which I didn't want to update because I can still use it can't make me update past system 8 because it can't update past system 8. It's not capable. So and I like not having to use system 10 on it, but I think it's getting to where it's not working well with the internet anymore. So I've written about this before a little bit in regard to, like, feminists will tell you, the patriarchy is the reason that men are discriminated against in family court. But actually, there's been a big push by feminists historically to make that happen. So the article is titled "The Feminist Crusade Against Fatherhood" on honeybadgerbrigade.com. It's originally, I published it on Breaking the Glasses, my blogspot blog, and there you go. But what I really want to start out looking at in this discussion is the men's rights post, which is the first link I posted under the notification for the space, which I think I posted it under my announcement and not the actual notification. Let me see if I can get this here and just post the whole thing as a link. If it lets me into the stupid discussion. I'm looking at it from my personal account, and it says I'm listening, but let's see. I'm just going to use Discord as a go-between. If it's going to be, the whole thing is going to be difficult for me, apparently, today. Welcome to Technical Difficulties with the Badgers. And that should give me access to the link, and then I should be able to post it. I'm using 2 computers and a phone here, so if I sound horrible and incompetent, that's why. So I'm going to post the link here in a comment under, there we go, under this. There we go. So there's a link to my tweet under my announcement of this on my account that give you these links, and that way I wanted to go through and you guys listen to me mutter to myself while I do the rest of this. But in the meantime, so let's get into the first link. Title 4D of the Social Security Act and its role in child sector has an interesting bit, and I looked at the section that is mentioned here. This is by a Redditor who goes by Tracy Morgan Freeman, which I think is absolutely fabulous. And what he's talking about here is kind of interesting. Right? We hear all the time from feminists in arguments when we start talking about the concept of paternal surrender that child support is for the child, not for the mother, and you're a deadbeat if you even consider the idea of paternal surrender, because obviously you just don't want to pay your bills. Like, you just don't care about your child, blah blah blah. Like, that's the whole thing. That's the whole argument. And in the meantime, the person collecting the money is not the child. And I wonder if it's because I'm using an earbud. Let's try something. Everybody's saying I'm still muffled, so hold on.
Yeah, are you sure you're going through the right mic? It sounds like you've defaulted to some kind of hardware mic.
Yeah, let's see what it. Well, it's because.
That's better. That's loads better. What did you?
Oh my gosh! So apparently my earbuds have a microphone. That's something I didn't know. All right. So, now that I sound better, like a normal person, all right, were you guys able to hear enough to find the post I was talking about? The Social Security Act post? Okay. So the post is actually pretty short. And what he's written here is, I know there's been occasional discussions about Title 4D and its impact on child custody, but I thought showing the law itself and some particular aspects of it would illuminate exactly how it undermines a father's rights and really parents' and children's rights. He links to the law and to the two relevant sections. And the reason this is relevant to the argument that child support is for the child is how this law is administered. It's one of the central cogs, he says, that drives child custody and child support arrangements. Essentially, the federal government reimburses states for having to research, prosecute, determine, and enforce child support, but also in Section 548, it incentivizes child support enforcement by paying states an amount equal to a portion of the support award itself. So what that means is when the government of your state, when you're, California government, Ohio government, Florida government, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, wherever, when it goes after a man for support on behalf of his ex-wife for his children, the state spends however much money administrating that, right? If the guy has to pay, if he's legally required to pay through the state, that money, essentially the cost of having a child support enforcement agency is that money. Having a child support caseworker handle that case, just having that case assigned to a caseworker generates then, here's how much money we're spending on this case. All she has to do is spend time filing paperwork in regard to this case, even if the guy is paying. Even if he's never in arrears, even if his wages are garnished and automatically sent through the state to his wife, there's still on paper, there's still a sort of a fake, these are our expenses generated. And the federal government reimburses that, right? So if they have to establish paternity, if they have to find out who the father is, if they have to prove in court who the father is, right? If they have to go through several guys because she's naming fathers and actually they're not the father, if the state has to do the Maury Povich thing, if the state has to go to court, if the father says, my child support is based on $60,000 a year, but I'm only making $30,000, and I never said I was making $60,000, so I'm going to file for a reduction, and the state fights that generates expense. The federal government pays all of that out of your tax dollars. And then, because the state generated these expenses, and the federal government has paid these expenses, the amount that the guy pays, the federal government pays the states a bounty equal to part of the support award. So how much he owes, what his obligation is. Does that kind of tell you guys something?
Kind of. The kind of stuff that I'm numb to at this point.
Well, you think about it, one of the arguments we get, one of the things that we get told over and over again is that, I've asked this a bunch of times, right? If child support is for the child, then why, when the mother receives public assistance, does the state keep the child support in return for it? If it's for the child, why is the state billing the child for the mother's expenses? Right? And I get told over and over again, well, it's reimbursement to the state. It pays the state back for the money the state is paying to the mother for the care of the child. Except it doesn't, because the state is paying itself. The state is taxing you to pay for all of these systems.
Yeah, it goes to pay the salaries of the people who push the paperwork. You know what I mean? That the clerks and all the lower level people within the system. That's what's really happening. You know? I mean, it's beyond ridiculous because why does any of this really need to be? I, I think it's really overblown. You know what I mean? It's the cost cannot be as exponential as they're getting away with charging for these services.
Yeah.
But you know, hey, it's for the good of the child, right? Well, where they're just lining their own pockets with this money.
Yeah. So
It's in the best interests of the child, do you see? Because it's not your child, it's our child.
oh my gosh, yeah. So let's take a look at this in terms of, let's say there's a real couple, Bob and Sue. And Bob and Sue have a child, Bobby Jr., right? Bob and Sue maybe never marry, maybe they get divorced, whatever. But they make their own custody arrangement. So they don't go to court, they don't fight it out. They make a legal agreement, and in that legal agreement, Bob is going to pay Sue X amount of dollars. Let's say $1,000 a month, based on Bob's income. And they've used the formula for their state to determine that the state expects Bob to pay $1,000 a month. All right, in a state like Ohio, and there are several other states that did this because of the changes to Title 4D in 2000, when the federal government added a bunch of these incentives. He's required to pay through the state. He cannot just hand Sue $1,000 every month and say, this is your child support payment for Bobby Jr. to make sure that, you can get him the things that are over and above the expenses you'd be spending if you lived by yourself and didn't have him. And so he has to pay it through the state. He has to take it to the Child Support Enforcement Agency, and there has to be a caseworker. It's not optional. He has to pay it there, or he has to have his wages garnished. And some states, like Ohio, don't even give you the option to not do wage garnishment if your employer is big enough that wage garnishment wouldn't be considered a big problem for them. Like if you're working for, a family business and the head of the household has to do all that, they don't make you do it. But if you're working for, say, McDonald's, they have to garnish your wages. But if you're working for McDonald's, you're not paying $1,000 a month for one kid, right? If you're working for a factory, if you're working for any organized business, any big business, they're going to have to do that, right? That garnishment, the paperwork for that goes through the Child Support Enforcement Agency. So at the very least, a couple that never argues about child support, that follows the formula the state says, where there's nobody contesting it or anything, and the state doesn't have to do anything except that the state has passed laws forcing you to engage with the Child Support Enforcement Agency in order to do your child support duty, according to the state. Like they still, on paper, there are expenses that they can claim that were generated by your case. But that worker already has a job. The worker is already doing this with cases where there are disputes and where somebody's payments have to be monitored and so on, where the child support obligation is created by the welfare payments that the mother is receiving, like, and so on. Right? Those cases, they're already getting paid for. But now, even though it is completely unnecessary for the state to handle your child support case, because you're willingly paying, Sue $1,000 a month for the care of Bobby Jr. when he's not staying with you. Now the taxpayers are paying for the state to track you doing that. Where there's literally just a piece of paper generated every week that says, yep, you paid it. So it kind of makes you wonder about the purpose there, right? So he goes on. This incentivizes state and municipal governments to break up families and not only award child support, but especially award custody to the lower earner, because support awards are based on income, not the actual cost of caring for the child, to ensure the most incentive pay via this law as possible. So in other words, it's to the state's advantage. Say Bob and Sue are married and they want to get divorced. It's to the state's advantage to place Bobby Jr. with whoever makes the lowest income, so that the state can then say, well, we have to collect child support from the other parent. Even if the other parent's cooperative, the state gets paid. There's still paperwork generated. The state can claim that there are hours dedicated and expenses dedicated to this case. Who am I hearing in the background? Was somebody wanting to speak?
Sorry, that was the cat purring.
Oh, apparently the cat really likes child support.
I do not. It angers me because, for someone like me who doesn't have kids and will never have kids, to know that I have to pay for this shit drives me up the wall just a little bit. Just a little bit.
It's the same problem as the welfare state. People will say, well, how are people supposed to operate without the government to help them out? Well, they managed it for a pretty bloody long time without the state helping them out. They, dare I say, kept their fucking legs together. And, when they weren't incentivized to have children at the expense of everyone else, they considered the idea that having children would be an expense on themselves, and so they exercised some self-control. And it's what I say. It's like the welfare state. It is the welfare state. Yeah. It's don't worry, ladies. Whatever decision you make, Uncle Sam will bail you out, or Daddy Government in any given country will bail you out. So you don't need to exercise self-control. We'll just steal money from men and give it to you, and everything will be fine, except for the rapid decline of civilization. That's you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelette, haven't you?
It's quite a system when you really think about it, because it doesn't change necessarily how much child support is being paid. It just changes how many taxes are being dedicated to its supposed collection, right? So we're looking at here. This is why I call it a political scam. Why I'm questioning, is this a political scam? Because the public gets this idea that welfare payments are super high because dads aren't paying their child support. It takes the heat off of the actual problem, which is that we have a bunch of social welfare problems or programs that problems is probably more accurate. Programs that essentially pay women to make stupid choices, and of course, when they make those stupid choices, it creates a self-perpetuating cycle, because it makes children more likely to grow up to rely on this system, right? So we have this situation with this system. It's really bad. And then we find out then we find out that the state is actually taxing you to pay the expenses of this. And from the sound of it, for every dollar that they collect, they're spending more than $1 in tax incentives, like in taxpayer-funded incentives. Does that seem a bit counterproductive? Like, can you imagine if you told your boss that you wanted to start a program at work to save the company money, but for every dollar you save to the company in the area that you were talking about saving, the company was spending more than $1 in shenanigans to make that savings happen? Like, we're going to cut costs on this material that we buy, but we're going to actually have to pay people to do more work in order to use this material. And so it's going to cost us, the material is only going to cost us 98% of what the material cost that we were already using. But we're going to spend that much plus another 50% paying people to make this other material work.
Yeah.
What would your boss tell you?
They would save money instantly by firing your ass.
Yeah. We can save $30,000 a year by firing this dipshit. Yeah, it's pathetic.
God.
And I look at this and I realize this has been going on for a very long time. So if we flip over to the let's see, it's the Scribd. Nope, it's not the Scribd link, it's a child's right link. You'll see there's a bunch of links on this page. So the link is the one that says a child's right type typepad.com, and then it has the rest of the link. Equal time with both parents, both fit parents, and the site itself, a childsright.net, is a pretty decent resource for information. Although it's a lot of what is on it is older, and it's mostly dedicated toward Michigan. So you won't see a lot of other states' specific income or information on this, right? And I managed to get some of the other links from this page as well. But it has a quote at the top from Phyllis Schlafly, which she's 6 of one, half dozen the other on some issues that we've talked about. But when it comes to this is quite an interesting point. She says the federal incentives drive the system. The more divorces and the higher the child support guidelines are set and enforced, no matter how unreasonable, the more money the state bureaucracy collects from the feds. Follow the money. The less time that non-custodial parents, usually fathers, are permitted to be with their children, the more child support they must pay into the state fund, and the higher the federal bonus to the states for collecting the money. So it is literally a bounty. It's like bounty hunter pay for collecting the heads of the fathers, their financial heads, for breaking up their families and collecting their heads. And if you scroll down to, I think it's the history of child support, the Title 4D in the U.S. Now, this doesn't actually give all of the history. This was posted long enough ago that, if I remember right, the history only goes up to like 1996. So it doesn't even include the 2000 contract for America. I always call it the contract on America because it was kind of in some ways like the federal government taking out a hit on people of low income. There was some good intention from the public in regard to supporting this, but I don't think that the politicians were well-intentioned. So if you look at the history of child support enforcement, it doesn't start in the United States. Because the United States, of course, started as colonies. It goes back to pre-19th century law in the UK. And so it references something called the Poor Laws, and the English Poor Laws, also known as the Elizabethan Poor Laws. So I'm going to give a really brief thing about that. It's not described very well here, but this is during the era right after the Black Plague that wiped out like a third of the population, and for the understanding of people in the United States, the UK, England was divided into parishes, local communities, like similar to how your state is divided into counties, or how your politicians have sort of gerrymandered your voting areas so that you have districts and so on. And there were a bunch of laws in regard to that governed how people could move and where you could live and work and so on. So you couldn't just, if you lived in one parish or district, you couldn't just go to another one and start participating in the whole economic sphere there. You had to get permission. That was one thing. And if you were impoverished, and a lot of people actually were after the plague, totally wiped out financially, you had options. Like the church could help you a little bit. There were workhouses. Workhouses were like, they were poorhouses, basically. You went there, you lived there in a very communal setting, like a homeless shelter, where you have a whole room full of beds, and everybody that lived there slept in one of those beds. Each person slept in one of those beds. You didn't have any kind of privacy or any kind of individuality in those areas. And you had work that you had to do. You worked very long hours, and it was to pay for your keep. You got food and you got shelter and maybe clothing. And that was it. But one of the earliest poor laws that's related to child support involved, if you had a family member that the government could track down and get in touch with, they would add up basically how much they spent on your food, and they would attribute a level of rent that you owed for being in this workhouse. They would go after that person for that money. And it was to encourage, like, if you had a cousin that was impoverished, it was to encourage the citizen to ask the cousin to come live with them instead of allowing them to be a ward of the state. Same was done with children, but it was also done with adults, right? So you have this historical idea that this protects the state coffers from being drained by the poor. But if you go farther back from that, you end up at King Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries, the devastation really of the monasteries. He broke them up and took out all of the money that they were using to support the poor, and that's pretty much why the state became the carer, I guess, for the poor. So it's really the state's fault that the state ended up dealing with this, because before the king wanted a divorce, the church took care of this and gave people assistance in finding employment and everything. So you have that as sort of the background. Everything that Republicans pretended was new in 2000 during the contract on America, was done in the 17th century poor laws. They would go after fathers of children born to unwed mothers. And of course, they didn't have DNA testing. So if she said he was the father, he would have to prove he wasn't. Like prove that he was somewhere else during the time of conception, basically, is the only way he could do that. Or prove that somebody else was the father in order to get out of being, taken by the state for that money. Or, he'd have to marry her. That continued into colonial United States. There was child support law during even the colonial times. There was child support law when the country formed. There was child support law during the 1800s, during the 1900s. It existed for circumstances under which the mother had custody or the parents never married. But it wasn't something that you would see, say, in divorce. For the most part, the father was given custody. Fathers didn't get child support. Fathers were expected to support the child. So that's sort of, I'm not going to go over all of this, but this sort of gives you an idea of what we're looking at in history. Was it all changes in the middle of the 19th century when the courts began flipping from paternal custody after divorce to maternal custody. And during the 19th century, American courts sort of saw there being a problem of dependency among single mothers and their children. And they created a legally enforcement child support duty, an enforceable child support duty. So basically, now the federal government could enforce, or the state government could enforce on the father. You have this amount that you have to pay, and you have to pay it. Whereas previously, the mother might be able to sue him for non-support. And previously, the courts would deal with whether or not, like, if the mother had money and could support the children, they might not enforce it. But during the 19th century, the mother didn't have to be poor in order to collect this. They invented a support obligation. And the context was, of course, single moms. So it's not something that's new, if that makes sense.
Nothing makes sense anymore.
Okay.
I don't want to be in this world.
It's a shame that more parents can't just come to some kind of amicable, agreement, instead of having to run to the court system when shit like this happens, or whenever they feel like it, or, just relying on the courts, getting them involved it's always a bad decision,
Yeah.
because then they're in your life, in ways that you really don't want them to be, like.
It creates a situation where the state, it sort of interferes in your relationship instead of fixing any problems or just staying out of it. Like, the state is now essentially stirring shit. And if that, again, I always say this, I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but it's sort of my position on it. So, and I'm gonna read. Meredith G gave us a super chow. I'm gonna read out. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 298. Because the child support enforcement is funded by the federal government, it encourages the system to pump up the expenses. Keep in mind, these practices breach all laws regarding collection of debt. And we just discussed this a couple weeks ago. We were talking about the debtor's prison issue. And And yeah, it does, because you have a bunch of penalties now if you don't pay child support. You go to jail, you lose your license, you
can't leave the
can't leave the
country.
country, right? You may have other restrictions on travel. They may actually start confiscating your assets, and say if your asset happens to be a business asset that you use to make your money. For instance, you've got a landscaping business, and one of your really important assets is a professional power mower, and you get behind on child support because maybe you get injured and you can't work for a couple of months. And even in communication with child support enforcement agency, if they think they can confiscate your stuff, they will. Let's say they confiscate your power mower. Well, now how do you go back to work? Exactly. What if you're a truck driver and they confiscate your truck? It is a racket. So you look at this, and ostensibly, historically, there was this belief that women who were single and had custody of their children would decrease in number if we just punished men enough for abandoning them. And it's presumed that that's how they end up that way, is that the man abandoned the woman and now she's in trouble and it's his fault. Right? That's our history of our entire history of ideas.
And that by default is assumed to be the case. Well, it must be the man who abandoned the woman. All right, and what happens if the woman abandons the man? Exactly the same thing. The woman gets the house, the woman gets the kids, the woman gets everything. Like, no matter who abandons who, the state gives everything to the woman, having stolen it from the man. So why would you assume that the man is at fault? Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. The same thing happens in either case. Right?
That's a great point. Did we lose Hannah?
I don't know. Hannah, are you just thinking? It's not like Hannah to go 10 seconds without a thought.
It definitely is not.
Hang on, let me check that. Yeah, she's not even in the broadcast.
Oh, Lord. Here we go. Technical difficulties with the Badgers. They plague us.
I think we're still coming through, actually.
Host is having connection issues. Give it a sec. They may reconnect soon. Let's see.
Yeah, it's just you and me, Lauren. We are still broadcasting, but the host is not. That's bizarre. So, how you doing?
I'm doing.
It's not good or bad. You're just doing. That's a good way to go.
I'm looking forward to the end of the month. It's a work thing. So.
Where I am, it is the end of the month now. It's officially March where I am. Get with the program, baby.
Hi ho. It's gonna be drinking day soon. St. Patty's Day.
Oh yeah. Yay. Is that not white supremacy yet? Oh no, wait, the Irish are not white. That doesn't count.
I thought that was last year. Wasn't that last year? I'm pretty sure I vaguely remember St. Patrick's Day being
Dang it. Okay, well now everybody on that I'm streaming to via OBS should be able to hear me again. This is bullshit. I don't know what the hell happened. But it looks like Twitter just ended my my space. So get back to our. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Oh, good. It looked like it. It looks like it on the thing. All right. Now, let's do this. See if I can get my co-host back.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, awesome. Okay, Mike's back.
All
Lauren's back. Good. We are back. We are back. It's not the same. Not the same stream, but
it is on YouTube. Thankfully,
it is on YouTube, but apparently not on Twitter. I still don't know what happened. I'm really not sure. I really couldn't tell you because nothing happened on my screen. It just stopped for no reason.
It died suddenly, you might say.
Yeah, our stream died suddenly. This pisses me off because we had a bunch of people listening and now we don't. That's annoying, really. So, all right. So continuing on from where I started, and I'm gonna have to go through and put the links back in too.
Yeah,
that's annoying. So,
yeah.
Hello, Lauren.
We'll just
we can hear you.
Yes. Hello.
Yay! All right. So I'm going to again comment under this stream and post the tweet, the link to the tweet where I have the links that we were looking at. I will share this and we're gonna go on. This is insane. I don't know why that ended. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Really doesn't make any sense to me at all. This is, I'm gonna have to figure out how or why this happened. Okay, I'm already in there. All right, just making sure. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna have to figure out how or why this happened later. But holy what the fuck, guys. Technical difficulties with the Badgers is upon us. In any case, so what we were talking about was previously in the 19th century, they had increased the state's involvement with this concept of child support over time from, a mother could sue for non-support if the family broke up, and a mother could accuse a husband, her children's father, of desertion or abandonment and so on. To the state came up with an obligation that if you are the father of a child and you're not married to the mother, that you owe this obligation, and the state began enforcing it. And late in the 19th century, states started passing laws making it a criminal offense with punishments that included prison. They even, like New York, added imprisonment with hard labor. With they had this idea that if you do hard labor in prison, it would incentivize you to work out of prison in order to avoid having to go through this, right?
That's so stupid. Yeah, your child's really gonna be able to eat all those license plates that they're making you make in the fucking jail.
Yeah. But so that was kind of the situation in pre-20th century. And then in the 20th century, of course, early in the 20th century, we have this Social Security Act, and nested within the Social Security Act was aid for dependent children, which later became aid for dependent families, which is part of the welfare system, and created Health and Human Services Department, and created a two-way street, sort of, where the general population is funding this element of the federal government, and then the federal government is paying women to make stupid choices. So we now have
I mean, not that they needed to, they were doing it anyway.
So we now have the state making payments directly to families, and that's used as an excuse throughout the 20th century to increase state leaning on fathers for child support. And of course, as the state is leaning on fathers for child support, there are more acts that are being passed in order to facilitate this. The Uniform Enforcement of Foreign Judgments Act, which had some applicability. It got replaced a few years later. The Uniform Reciprocal Enforcement of Support Act, which in all 50 states, DC, all the territories, provided a system for interstate enforcement of support orders without requiring the person seeking support to go to the state where the person they were seeking it from was. So if you were in Ohio and you wanted to claim that a man in California was the father of your child and was not supporting the child and owed you money to support the child, you didn't have to go sue him in California. It allowed women to make claims against men in other states. And it really didn't have a lot of fraud protection. And there have been cases where women have, for the same child, filed cases against multiple fathers in multiple states and collected from all of them.
God damn it. I mean, you would think with some of that money that they're collecting that they would be able to investigate shit like that. Like maybe their databases could talk to each other or something. Is that too much to ask? I mean, I don't think that's very difficult to do. I mean,
Yeah.
don't police departments, they talk interstate? I mean,
Yeah, they do. You would think that they would want to avoid fraud, right? Fraud would be a bad thing in the system, right?
Apparently not.
Yeah, so what would you think of a system that used your employer's money? So your employer is paying to collect from customers, and you might collect from 3 or 4 customers for the same service, and your employer does nothing to prevent fraud in this instance. What do you think would happen in a normal legal system to a business that did that?
Oh God, they'd be raked up and down the coals.
Yeah, if my bank, for instance, went after me for somebody else's mortgage and was already receiving payments from them, plus 2 other residents in the area for the same mortgage, maybe in different neighborhoods, maybe in different municipalities. Oh no, it's this person in Huber Heights is paying for this Dayton mortgage. No, this person in Centerville is paying for this Dayton Beaver Creek, the Beaver Creek resident is paying for the Dayton mortgage, and they're all 3 paying. Don't you think the government would do a few things to the bank for that? Don't you think the individuals would have some recourse where they could sue and the bank would have to pay them back? We didn't know this mortgage. It's not my house.
In a normally functioning world, yes.
Yeah.
It makes all
So
the
this is
sense.
really. Go on.
No, I was just gonna say that makes all the sense in the world. But
Right.
this is not the normal world. Nothing is normal.
Nah. So the abnormality of it indicates that the purpose isn't just the function that we're told this is for. If it was specifically to hold fathers accountable, or specifically to ensure that the children were receiving support, there would be something in place to deal with fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And there would certainly be something in place to deal with the scam artist that's perpetuating the fraud, right? But that's not the case here. And instead, the state only increased the power it devoted to collecting child support. So in 1965, amendments to the Social Security Act allowed welfare agencies to obtain addresses and employers of obligated parents from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. So now, the welfare agencies can more easily go after your supposed deadbeat dad by contacting his boss and heckling his boss over his non-payment.
The purpose of a system is what it does, or Poisewid for short. It's a phenomenon that's only recently been discovered. People like to say that the purpose of a system is based on the intentions of those who enforce it. But once we're long into the existence of a system and being exposed to what it does and what it does not align with the good intentions of those who enforce it, you have to conclude that the purpose of a system is not the good intentions of those who claim to oversee it. The purpose of a system is what it does, because it keeps doing what it does at all times.
And there we go. Now we're getting into the meat of it, right? Like this is what one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this history. This system historically has done nothing to stem the tide of single mother households that were partially or entirely reliant on government benefits. That has increased steadily since the concept of government payments to single mothers with children was created in the United States. Right? You get into the latter half of the 20th century, it accelerated exponentially. And in 1974, taking effect, I think, in 75, Congress actually created Title 4D of the Social Security Act, which is the program that specifically makes those payments we were talking about, where the federal government pays the state for every dollar the state can attribute to as an expense related to collecting child support from fathers. And the wording of it's real weird. Let's see if I have it up here. I think I opened it. Yeah. It gives it has an incentive payment pool. It creates an incentive payment pool. And when it was first written, it gave an amount. And then it went through and named several years after the writing of it. And increased the amount each fiscal year. And they've updated it over time. I think the last time it was updated was in 2000 during the again, the Contract on America. And at that point, it was $422 billion. in 2000. And they cited in the passage of that bill, they described increases through the year 2008. And then after the year 2008, the paragraph says, for any succeeding fiscal year, the amount of the incentive payment pool for the fiscal year that precedes such succeeding fiscal year, multiplied by the percentage, if any, by which the CPI for such preceding fiscal year exceeds the CPI for the second preceding fiscal year. The CPI being the incentive payment pool. So essentially, however much percentage it's increasing every year, it will continue to increase that much every year thereafter. That's what it's saying.
That's crazy. So even if birth rates aren't, increasing, and there's not more children being put into the system, they get more bucks.
Yeah, just based on how much it increased the previous year,
Good God.
not based on need, not based on anything else.
Wow.
That this fund is to have that much more money put into it every year.
That's your government hard at work, people.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And then it makes payments. The state doesn't just get a payment, right? So you have, say, Ohio goes after Bob for Bob Jr.'s child support. And there's different layers of how this works. So first, you make a child support arrangement and you're required to pay through the state. The state says, all right, but we have to establish paternity. And Bob says, well, that's easy. I signed the birth certificate. I'll sign paperwork that says I'm the father. The state's like, nope, you got to take a paternity test. Required, must do. Test will be taken. You don't get a choice. So now the state has the material they need to send to the federal government saying we had to establish paternity. So they have payment A, the paternity establishment performance level. And for every guy they make establish paternity who they already know is the father, that increases that performance level, the percentage of that performance level. And so that way they get a higher percentage of the cost of paternity establishment reimbursed. Because if they just went after every guy that was named and said, no, I'm not the father, and let's say 50% of men who the state goes after as fathers turn out to not be the father, then they would only get back 50% of the cost. But if they force an equal number of men who already are admitting, yes, I am the father, and they're correct, they haven't been cheated on, to also submit to paternity tests, suddenly now we're at 75%, and the federal government will reimburse them for 75% of the cost of testing. And now they're taking in more money. And they can even, make the child support cost higher to pay for that paternity test, or charge the father for that paternity test, and then still get reimbursed by the state, the federal government. And nobody can do anything about it. They can't be stopped.
That's unbelievable.
Then you have, and that's just the first layer, right? Support order performance level is the next layer. So if you have them going after just men who are not paying, that might be a lower performance level, especially if it's guys that are homeless, guys that are not working, guys that are maybe falsely accused of making more money than they actually make, or guys who don't believe they're the father, whatever. They're not paying. That would be a low level. But if every man who pays child support in the entire state has to pay through the state, the payment performance level goes much higher and they get much more money back. Doesn't change how much the actual agency is doing to make sure payments get made. But now they're getting paid a lot more. Wouldn't you love to do that at your job?
Hell yeah.
And my job performance doesn't have to increase at all. None. But now I'm going to get, 50% more money for doing it for no reason. Because I did this thing on paper that makes it look like I'm more efficient than I really am.
Yeah. Oh my God.
What do you think your employer would do if they caught you doing that?
Again, I say 15% of my insurance by firing your ass.
You get your sorry ass fired fast.
Yes.
So then that's the performance level, current payment performance level. Then the arrearage payment performance level comes in. Right. So I got a story for you guys. And I think I told this 2 weeks ago too. When during the 2000 election, when I hate to do this, but when President Bush was running for office, and when Congress, the Republicans that took over Congress that year were running for office, I think that state governments pretty well knew that we were going to have this sweeping change in politics that year. There was no doubt. Whether that's because whether it's because the elections were all theater, or whether it's because that was just the political environment in the United States, I'll leave that up to people to discuss, because it's not the subject of this particular episode. But I will say that what I believed at the time and what I believe now are totally different. And if you look at the orchestration that takes place around every campaign with the establishment media and everything, it really does look like they're just taking turns, right? And then using public support as an excuse to enact laws like this, right? But yeah, so Ohio knew, and they made it law that fathers who owed child support couldn't just pay directly to the wife, the ex-wife, mother of their child. They had to pay through the state. If they didn't pay through the state, it didn't count as child support. And no matter how much money they gave the mother of their child directly, if they had a child support obligation, they would be considered to be in arrears. And then they made it retroactive for a whole year. So men who had been current on their child support suddenly were in arrears. And of course, men who were current on their child support were current on their child support because they were doing their due diligence according to the state. They were paying. So they essentially put into arrears a whole population of men who were compliant with the law. So what do you think those men did?
Does it have anything to do with mens rea?
They were already compliant. When you think about it, they tried their best. Most of them did everything they possibly could to catch up. My husband included. And that included me paying into the system to help us get caught up. I paid child support to another woman for children who are not my biological children because of this. And I am not the only stepmom that did that, because I've been in stepmom groups on Facebook for years, and we'd all talked about this. Yes, we'd all paid child support to our husbands' ex-wives through the state for children that not only were not biologically ours, but many of us experienced resentment from the ex for any relationship that we had with the child. So if the child didn't hate us for being the other woman, even though we weren't, that was they got mistreated at home for that. But yeah, so the state collected the same child support twice that year from a lot of men. And in our case, it took us a long time. It took us 10 years to get caught up, to recover financially from that blow. And that was by design, right? But that created the illusion of a high performance level for arrearage. And of course, Ohio got a shit ton of money from the federal government for that. And because you had done this to men who were already compliant and who were going to respond to it by doing their level best to catch back up again after being put into arrears falsely, it goes to the next layer, the cost effectiveness performance level. Well, they didn't have to spend a lot of money to do this. So the federal government pays the state for showing that they're spending less than they would otherwise have to, right? The federal government pays the state extra money for not having to spend money. So they pay them for spending the money, and then they pay them for not spending the money.
Getting that coming and going. Jesus.
Yep. And then there is also the layer where however much money they collect, they get a bounty. So if they collect 90% of what is owed to them that year, they get a bounty of 90% of the allowance set aside for the state. So that's how it ends up being the federal government paying the states more than the state is actually spending, and paying more than the state is actually collecting in child support. And it actually costs the federal government more to collect that child support than they're taking in child support. So that proves that that claim that, well, it's to reimburse the government for its expenses. Well, no, hell it is. It's not. It can't be to reimburse, because it's not reimbursing. It's costing them more to collect it than it is to than they're getting out of it, right?
God, it's ridiculous. And the thing that's maddening about it is that it's never going to change. It's never, at least that's the way it feels. I mean, why in the world would they take this bill, these laws, and just say, you know what, screw it, we were wrong. Let's redo it and make it, more equitable. They're never going to do that.
Yep, exactly. And here's the question then, right? So what's the result of this? What is actually occurring in response to this? The first thing is this agency, this department that does this is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger every year.
Mm-hmm.
It's growing exponentially, and it's becoming the bulk of what the government is and what the government does. So that's the first result. The second result is we are seeing less and less a hardship, less and less detriment to being the collector, the person who has custody and not a partner, and is living on welfare and child support. So as a result of that, and as a result of the feminist sexual revolution, anti-slut shaming, you can't disparage single moms who had children out of wedlock and so on. We're now to the point where almost half of children born in the United States annually are born out of wedlock. That used to be a rare thing. It used to be a thing that, the community might rally around the girl, or the community might shame the girl, but it was the girl, not the whole neighborhood.
Right.
right? Now it's almost half of children born in the United States annually are born out of wedlock. And then there's also the divorce rate on top of that. So there are going to be, we're looking at more single parent homes than two parent homes in the country as a result of this. So what's the purpose again? Why are we doing this? Why is this
better for kids, Hannah? Just tear up all the family structures so that nobody even knows what a family looks like anymore, you know? Just blur all those lines. Yeah, of course, we're just gonna have nothing but normally well-adjusted, mentally healthy children. That's how that works, right?
Yeah, I look at this and I keep thinking about, let's consider, you know, what Mike said about the function, the outcome being the revealing the real purpose.
The purpose of the system is what it does. You can look it up. It's a phenomenon now. Like the purpose of because a system is not something controlled by any individual human. It's a machine invented by humans that that grows out of the control of any of the individual humans who purport to control it. And the purpose of that system outgrows those humans. And like I say, all the good intentions in the world of the humans who purport to control it, it outgrows them, and the purpose of the system is to steal money from men and give it to women. Even if there are no humans left in that system who are trying to do that, the system itself is now doing it. And we can philosophically argue all day about the nature of purpose and what purpose really is, but what a system does is its purpose, and the purpose at this point is just that, to steal from men and give to women, and that's the government in a nutshell. better than I can ever describe it without that principle.
Exactly. I look at this and knowing that, and knowing what we looked at last week, where we saw how the academic study of women's studies was funded and was promoted and was grown inorganically by government contributions and establishment organization contributions, where the people involved weren't just some grassroots movement that ended up being successful because what they were trying to do was popular and necessary, but was actually manipulating academia and trying to manipulate the social and cultural environment through academia. And we look at that and we see its contributions to this evolution, where public opinion is manipulated, right, by combination of just prevailing narratives, in publishing, in public discussion, in news reporting, in entertainment media, in every place that you look, and in academia, that imply, you know, that the entire existence of poverty in single mother homes in the United States is the fault of fathers, and has absolutely nothing to do with the behavior of mothers, and has absolutely nothing to do with the contributions of government. It's pretty obvious that our civilization, our society, has been manipulated over about the last 100 to 200 years, to give government more power to facilitate that transfer. of money from men to women. And it's not just those fathers, right? Every guy in the United States pays into the system, except for the very few that have zero money at all, and the very few that are able to use how they handle their money, to get out of paying their taxes. Like that's it. Those are the only people that are excluded. So the entire middle in between the extreme poor and the extreme wealthy are paying in, and they're not getting enough back in benefits to say, well, they're not net payers into the system, whereas the female population in general gets enough back in benefits that it's, unless you're talking somebody like Lauren, who is single, doesn't have kids, doesn't get any kind of because I'm a woman incentive pay, no taxpayer funded grants or loans or anything like that. Didn't start a woman-owned business to exploit the system or anything like that. Like Lauren's paying like a man. I'm
Yep.
not.
And I'll take any one of them grants if you got. Good Lord.
I suppose technically now I am, but for years, and I'm probably not now because I'm married. But most women, most of us, never become net payers into the tax system. Like our whole lives, we are getting more back one way or another in benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there's some active benefits and there's some passive benefits. So if you don't go for welfare, for instance, but you work in an environment where there is incentive paid to your employer to hire more women, your employer gets money because you're there. You're benefiting from that. They're more likely to hire you than a man because of that. And there's a lot of environments that have that. If you've ever attended university and you got financial aid, there is financial aid you can get because you're a woman that you can't get if you're a man. If you've ever tried to start a business and gone after a business loan, your bank gets paid to offer you a more lenient loan system than a man would get because you're a woman. So, like when I talk about passive benefits, there are things that women get from the federal government as they're concepts, I guess you could say. Like I can't really say I'm benefiting from most of that stuff because I haven't used it, but it's still being done in my name because I'm a woman. Right? And my employer gets that kind of incentive, I'm sure. I've had 2 or 3 employers that have definitely capitalized on, look how many women we hire. And so that is something that, everybody's going to apply for jobs. You can't control whether or not your employer gets that money and takes advantage of that money. Like you could maybe work for smaller businesses that don't get that money because they don't know how to apply for it. But if you work for a big corporation, your employer's probably getting that money. Like that's maybe one thing even Lauren's benefiting from. But most women, if you've been married, if you've had children, if your children have gone to the public school system, if you've had any kind of financial aid for university or anything else, there's a level that you've gotten because you're a woman that men paid for through the state. And this type of incentive is this type of program is part of that. So the last thing I want to touch on before I read any super chats, which we do have 2 that I saw. Let me make sure I still have the second one. Yeah, I still have the second one. Oddly enough, I didn't copy that over to the page I used to make sure that I don't lose them. So I'm going to do that really quick. But I talked about Michael's thread, and I want to just highlight a little bit about it. So that's actually in the low bar. Low bar is not right, but under the Twitter space, where you can sort of see there's a series of links, and the top tweet in that thread is one of the links. Let me go back to that. I just had it open. There we go. All right. So something else to understand about how child support evolved in the United States goes back to the UK again. Prior to the adoption of the tender years doctrine via the Custody of Infants Act of, I believe, 1839, it was standard in divorce that the father would have custody of the child because the father had the income. It was expected that he would be able to support the child on his own, and mothers were not obligated to pay child support. And that carried over into the United States. Divorce was not like super common back then. For one thing, you didn't have no-fault divorce. What no-fault divorce basically did was the one way a woman could get custody in divorce prior to no-fault divorce was if the reason for the divorce was because her husband cheated on her, or her husband abandoned her, or her husband violated the legal obligations that he had under marital law and under coverture, which, like, among other things, if he stopped having sex with her, that would be one. So there were different things that women could complain about to the court and say, I want a divorce and I want custody of my children and I want child support, and they could get it. But Carolyn Norton, she and her husband split up. He wasn't cheating on her. He wasn't beating her. He wasn't denying her anything. So she couldn't complain about anything to the court that would justify her obtaining custody and getting support from him. So if she divorced him, she was the one guilty of abandonment, and so she didn't. But she didn't have any custody rights because she had chosen to separate herself from him. Right? So what no-fault divorce did was actually make it all his fault divorce. In every divorce, custody was presumed to go to the mother, based on the tender years doctrine stating that it was in the best interest of the child for custody to go to the mother. During the younger years, like up to age 7, that a child is in desperate need of mom's attention but doesn't need dad so much, which is bullshit. That's an industrial era look at parenting. Prior to the industrialization of our civilization, if your dad put horseshoes on horses for a living, he'd start teaching you how to do that when you were like 5. And by the time you were, 12 years old, you might be working for him. If your dad was a baker, by the time you were 12 years old, you'd be a baker. Like none of this, especially if you were a boy. Right? None of this, dad's not involved in the kid's life because he's out in the workplace. The workplace was his home. Mm-hmm. His profession was at home. So, anyway, if you look at the Michael Stretton thread here, he mentions that, and then he also talks about the fact that child support exists because women, unlike men, were viewed by society, including by women, to be incompetent in handling their finances and incapable of working enough to care for the children by themselves. And if you remember, in the United States, we passed a law in I believe it was 1963, the Equal Pay Act, that prior to that, if you were a minority or if you were a woman, your employer could pay you less for the same work. Could, if, legally, if the market didn't make it impossible. And so if you did a job that was maybe everybody could do that job, and there wasn't a lot of competition among employers to get people to do that job. If you were a minority or you were a woman, you probably made less. For millennia, he says, when men were the sole custodial parents after divorce, women were neither asked nor required to pay child support. Men had to support the children of whom the men had custody. And the question he asks, I think, is very relevant. Why can't modern women handle the same degree of responsibility as men of old? Like, why can't women do what men have always been expected to do? So I have the only answer that I can conclude from the information that we've been looking at tonight. It isn't that women can't do it. It isn't even that women won't do it. It's that it's beneficial to the government if women don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of the system is what the system does. The system exists to transfer money from men to women in order to perpetuate a need for its own existence. That's the purpose of the system. The purpose of the system is to perpetuate a need for the system, or at least a perceived need. So it is literally a self-perpetuating family destruction machine.
It's a self-licking ice cream. That's another phenomenon that you all can look up.
Self-licking ice cream. That's perfect. It's really angering. We literally have a government agency that exists to abuse the public in ways that will perpetuate the image of a need for itself without benefiting anyone. Child support is for the child? Bullshit. Child support is for the collection agency.
Mm-hmm.
Child support is for the government. Child support is for the politicians that posture and preach and run on the idea of making those bad deadbeat men pay for what they did to those poor innocent women that they impregnated through no act of the woman's own. Just, walking down the street and whacked her in the belly with a pregnancy stick.
It's the dark side of meme magic. It's hard to understand exactly what a meme is, but a meme is any point of information that is repeated in the brains of human beings. It's like a gene is any point of information that is repeated within the biological, the genetics of any living creature. This is how the word meme was coined, I think, by Richard Dawkins. It was actually modeled around the word gene. That's why it's called meme, because it's a mimetic gene. It's a piece of information that is repeated in the minds of human beings. A word is a kind of meme. An artistic style is a kind of meme. And the systems we create governmentally, politically, are a kind of meme. And they develop a life of their own. And it's scary because it's much easier to create these kinds of meme systems than it is to understand them, because, as I say, they develop a life of their own with a purpose of their own that is based on what they do and not what we as humans think they're doing, even though we created them. We're at this stage where we're creating robots that have agendas beyond what we as humans can understand. and I'm not just talking about AI. When I describe that, it sounds like I'm talking about AI, but this has already existed for centuries. The government itself is the perfect example of this kind of machine that we've created that develops an agenda that, even though we created it, runs amok in ways that we couldn't possibly have predicted. And because we couldn't have predicted it, we have trouble even understanding how the agenda of these machines work. And we here at Honey Badger Radio are here to kind of to kind of shed some light on how the fuck these things work, especially when it comes to the machines that prey on our gynocentric nature. And yes, we do have a gynocentric nature, not one that pertains to the absolute madness that it's become in the 21st century, but it's that little nugget of gynocentrism to which human beings are drawn has become this post-industrial nightmare machine of gynocentrism that has grown beyond our means exponentially. So yeah, like I say, it's an uphill battle that's going to be very difficult for us to understand. But I think we can, if you all start listening to the people who are trying to explain it rather than calling us a bunch of names.
Yeah, that's the tough part. Getting people to recognize, what we're looking at. We're not doing it just because we have attitudes toward the genders and so on. We're doing it because we're looking at the impact of these systems on people, and we're looking at the impact of these systems on the development of our culture and how it changes the outcomes experienced by individuals. And unfortunately, this system really damages individuals in a lot of ways. It really harms, it breaks up families. It creates incentive for carelessness. There's a reason why, the top of my my main page, my regular Twitter account, at the very top of it, the background is just white text on a black background that says, "Stop paying women to make stupid choices." Right? When women make these choices, they make their own lives harder. They make their child's life harder. They make their father or their child's life harder. And they make your life harder because they increase the incentive for the government to collect from you to make up for their shortcomings. And none of them make those choices with these things in mind. They're not doing it out of malice. They're doing it out of carelessness. They're doing it out of a lack of forethought and a lack of foresight and a lack of self-awareness. It's really, it's like the start domino at the beginning having no view of where the last domino falls, or many of them in between. Something that has to change. And women need to be more aware of this. Women need to understand, if I fuck around, I'm not the only one who's going to find out. If I fuck around, when the find out hits, it's going to hit me, it's going to hit my kid, it's going to hit my kid's father, it's going to hit all of the people that pay taxes into the system that is there to act as my safety net when I fall. Because you're responsible for that. Even if you don't take responsibility for it, you still caused that. You're still ethically culpable for that. You should at least know that.
Yeah, we have a machine called the government that diffuses the find out into everyone else around you, but it doesn't diffuse it completely away from you as a woman. It diffuses it into the men in your life, the children in your life, but there's still a few grains of find out that you're going to have to deal with, ladies. And if you don't want to inflict that find out on yourself and the men in your life and the children in your life, then stop fucking around.
It's really sad. Men are the primary victims of things that happen to men. But when it comes to the backlash of women's choices, everyone else are the primary victims. Women are the secondary victims of the backlash of choices that they make in ignorance, whether it's cultivated by themselves or by their environment. So the way I would exemplify that, let's say you're a single mom, your child doesn't have a father in the home, doesn't have a good male mentor, doesn't grow up understanding masculine accountability, masculine cooperativeness. None of the things about healthy adult masculinity are being communicated to this child. So if the child's a boy, this creates increases the chances of him ending up on the wrong side of the law in adulthood by 50%. If the child is a girl, it increases the chances of her getting together with an asshole instead of a good partner in her adulthood. It increases the chances that she's also going to become an unwed mother. And any financial hardship you've gone through, it increases the chances that your daughter is going to experience that. It increases the chances that your son's going to experience that. Increases the chances that you're going to sit in a courtroom and watch the bailiffs haul your son off to juvie, where he might be raped by the women who work there, because research into the occurrences of sexual misconduct in the juvenile detention system in the United States indicate that the majority of sexual misconduct in the facilities is committed by staff, not by inmates, at least at the male facilities. And that despite being less than half of the staff at these facilities, more than 95% of the perpetration involves female staff. So it's like I said, those dominoes. First domino is you deciding not to make a partnership with the father, a marriage with the father, the underlying scaffolding for your reproductive choices. Right? That's the first domino. The first domino is you deciding, I don't need to be sure that I want this man to be the father of my child before I have sex with him. And then not using proper birth control or whatever, or maybe getting married and having kids and then getting divorced. Either way, now you have a single mother household. And the end domino, you might not have foreseen that. You might not have thought, my kid's going to end up in juvie getting raped by, I don't know, the librarian. But that result is an outcome of your choices. Right? Obviously, the kid is the primary victim of that. But if you're a mom and you see that happen to your kid, you know that happened to your kid, it still hurts. You don't want that. But the only way for women to avoid inflicting those kind of outcomes on the people around them is if we get women to think about their actions before they engage in them. Or like I like to say, love your children before you have them. And yeah, the retort to that, and I hear this retort all the time, well, if men didn't stick their dicks in everything.
Oh, God.
there's only two circumstances under which a guy can stick his dick in a woman. All right. Either he's raping her, which is the rare circumstance, or she consented. She chose that, which is the other circumstance. Yeah, he's responsible for where he sticks his dick. She's responsible for accepting it. She's responsible for all of the different types of birth control that she decides on. And not deciding on it is still a decision, right? She's responsible for carrying to term. She's responsible for retaining custody. You don't have to retain custody. There's the father. There's an adoption system. There's your family. There's the safe haven abandonment system. If you have no other option, there's the safe haven abandonment system. It's not ideal. But if you're going to be a poverty situation for that child, and you weren't smart enough to not have sex, to not pick a partner that wasn't going to raise a kid with you, to use birth control, to use multiple forms of birth control, and to use them effectively, or to not carry to term, which I don't like that option, but it is an option that women have, then it's on you to decide that maybe you're not the best choice as the person to raise that child.
Yeah, don't stick your dick in crazy is good advice, and it's always been good advice. It's always been the advice we give to men. And don't envelop your vagina around crazy is good advice. But at some point in history, people just stopped giving that advice to women. They just kept saying, yeah, envelop your dick around crazy and then rinse that crazy for all the money you can. But,
well, and the tough thing for me is I only hear what about the men. I don't hear anybody talking about where men should or should not stick their dick, except in reply to how women can protect themselves and their communities from women's sexual mistakes. Right? It's not a response to say, well, men can be careful too. That's deflection. It's not somebody else's fault when a woman makes a bad decision, even if somebody else was involved in that bad decision and also made bad decisions. It doesn't improve the nature of her decisions, and it doesn't absolve her of her decisions. Women's actions matter. We know men's actions matter. We have a history of acknowledging that men's actions matter, and we have a history of responding to the fact that men's actions matter. In fact, we have a history of overreacting to how much men's actions matter. But we can't forget that women's actions also matter. I mean, am I being unreasonable here? To me, I see gynocentrism in saying that talking about how much women's actions matter is giving men a free pass.
Yeah.
This was a good time for a pregnant pause. That's why we left one.
No, we don't want the pause to be pregnant either. I'm using a pause condom right now. Okay. So I'm gonna get more into the super chats before I forget to read them. So we got one before the show that wasn't related to the show. Talimnar gave us $100. Thank you, Talimnar, and said, "Dear Allison, I am catching up on your content, and in the middle of your rant, Zerker 207, the way you described the relationship with your husband has compelled me to donate this money to help you two out. It is all so very wholesome. I am certain if you went on one of those red pill podcasts or like whatever and explained how you make your marriage work, then you would be very popular with all the men and the women who were worth a damn." I don't know what I did. I haven't seen that rant Zerker, so I don't know what that's in response to, but I will say this. it's fun to be around Allison and her husband
they
because
they
they're
are
a lot like me and my husband.
they argue like they're brother and sister, but they've been together for 25 years.
Yeah. And you can feel how much they love each other. Right? They definitely love each other very much. And it's great. Modern marriage, a lot of things have changed that, like, people like Allison and her husband have not abandoned the old-fashioned expectation that when you're in a partnership, there's give and take, that you care about each other, and that you work toward each other's welfare, and that you make each other a priority in your actions, instead of just thinking about yourself. And it's reliant on love relies on viewing the other as important as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we hold men to that. Women fail at it a lot. So it is fun to be around a relationship where both partners understand it and both partners live it. But yeah. The next one was the one, I don't know if I finished reading this or not. It was Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 298, because child support enforcement is funded by the federal government, it encourages the system to pump up expenses. Keep in mind these practices breach all laws regarding collection of debt. And I think we talked about banks in regard to that.
Yes.
And then Richard Beer gave us $5 and said, eventually the proposed solution will be to create I think that's cliches, maybe caches for all children, and tax everyone to pay for it. And actually, there was a thing in the, where was it? Not the Reddit post. Yeah, the history of Title IX thing that I was looking at. At one point, America was unique in not having a tax refund or any other type of, like we do now. But the federal government didn't pay parents for having children for a long time, which it shouldn't, because you got to take that money from somebody to give it to them, right? So they're punishing people for not having kids, and the government shouldn't be deciding who has kids or incentivizing or disincentivizing or any other financial action around people having children. That should be based on the individuals in question, right? But yeah, other countries were already doing that well before the United States created what the fuck is it called? The Earned Income Tax Credit.
Mm.
The Earned Income Tax Credit is a credit given not to all parents with children, but to parents between two specific income levels. Basically, parents that are at the higher end of poverty or up to the middle of being middle class. And it maximizes and then goes down. So if you barely make anything, you don't get much. And if you make a ton, you don't get much. But if you're in the middle of that group and you're just barely above the poverty level, or you're squeaking by, the federal government might actually give you back more money than you paid in. And I was working at the gas station I worked at when I became aware of how other people spend that money, because like that's something it's a tax credit. So you fill out your information and it affects how much you get back in taxes, and you get your tax refund back. We always, the whole time that we had a child support obligation to deal with, that money always went toward the child support obligation. If we had any left over besides what we had to pay into the child support obligation, it went to things like the electric bill. It went to things like, car payments or car repairs, rent, stuff like that. It went for bills. Like, that's what it was intended for. And, we didn't have a bunch of extra money to be spending on other stuff. But I would go to work and listen to the women I worked with talk about how they got a brand new big screen television with that money. And where, as a married couple with 2 incomes, my husband and I might be eligible for a few $100, or maybe our full tax refund with that included. We overpaid by, 1 year we overpaid by like $2,000. So we got back $2,000. And we had enough to pay a month's electric bill after we paid into the child support obligation. That same year, my one coworker, who was a single mom, receiving child support, receiving public benefits, got back $8,000. She didn't pay in $8,000, but she got back $8,000. This woman had been complaining about how difficult it was to get to work because she had a piece of shit car. My household has not paid more than $2,000 for a car the entire time I've been married. Like, we buy them, we fix them as needed. We run them until they won't run anymore. Like, literally, the last vehicle I legally owned, we stopped driving it because one of the wheels broke off. Like, you don't drive after that, obviously. I drove that thing to death. And the one before that, the second time the transmission went out, it was going to cost more to fix the transmission than it would to get a vehicle that worked better. That's how we did things, right? So I thought, oh, well, $8,000, she ought to be able to get a really good car. She'll be in good shape. She'll be able to get to and from work. No, she bought a big screen TV and a bunch of other stuff and kept complaining about her car. Didn't understand why she couldn't have, a better car. It's like, well, because when you get $8,000, you spend it on shit. Like, that's how that works. That's how that system works. So when you guys pay into that system and you're helping these women out, you're helping them make stupid choices. So yeah, the state might do that. The state might create earmarked funds for all children and tax everyone to pay for it. But the result is going to be a bunch of women buying big screen TVs and PlayStations and Xboxes and expensive one-time wear clothes and shoes and shit like that, going out drinking with their friends and driving piece of shit cars that don't get them to and from work. Our super chats, we have 2 that I've seen. Albert Nader Retro gave us both of them. The first one, he gave us $5 and said, yes, harsher for women, the less prison time, unfair do not draft policy, the whole forced to get on the lifeboat rule. Good Lord, those poor women. And that was in response to women being oppressed. That was early in the other stream for people listening on Twitter. And then gave us another $5 and said, by the way, look up Stephanie Sanzo if you want some fitness inspiration. She is enough to get you working out. I'll be upping my game pretty soon. And I need to do that. I need to get better about that myself. So I appreciate that. I will have to look that up. And I think that's it. I don't think we really have any other super chats, super chows, super comments from people to read off. So I'm just going to go back to, because the argument is still happening in the chat. Yeah, no, it is not a valid response to answer discussion of how women are responsible for women's choices and women are culpable for the outcomes of women's choices by deflecting to men and their choices. Right? If I am one of 3 people who kicks a dog and the dog turns around and bites me, it's still my fault that I provoked a dog. And if that dog goes off and bites somebody else, it's still my fault that I provoked a dog. Even if it's also 2 other people's fault that they also provoked a dog. I don't become innocent because somebody else did it too. That's not how it works. Right? So it is not just an invalid response to bring up men when we're discussing women's responsibility and culpability for women's choices. It is actually stupid. But with that, I think we're going to call it. I'll have to find out. We were going to talk more with the grossness and human relations specialist, Jewel Eldora, on this subject. I think we'll have to do that another time. Find out where she is and what happened there. But in the meantime, I'm going to thank everybody for listening. Thank everybody who showed up to both streams for giving it the old college try. I'll figure out, I don't know if maybe there's something that happened with my internet here, or if it was, maybe I'll have to just not use the Wi-Fi to do this the next time, and just rely on my phone service. Maybe Spectrum fucked us over.
I think it was the Twitter thing, because while you went offline, Lauren and I were still here.
Yeah.
Weird.
So, yeah, it's any given social media site is going to fuck us over one way or another.
Yeah, that sounds like a glitch of some sort.
Yeah, we got through it,
Yeah. But thank
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.